Wealth is a word that can evoke many different emotions and ideas for different people. More often, it is associated with material well-being or how resilient an economy is based on the strength of its economic progress determined by economic indicators. However, some time back, many years ago, it was Robert Kennedy in the US in 1968 who gave a stinging critic of the primary measure of economic progress. He said GNP measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. That's a very profound statement. He was referring to what has been coined today as genuine wealth. And to discuss further, I have with me human behavior specialist, Dr. John DiMartini, who also published an article on genuine wealth. Great to have you with us, John.
Thank you for having me again.
It was a lovely article you wrote on genuine wealth.
Thank you.
You're a wealthy person in terms of you being amongst the less than 1% of people in the world having gained financial independence. So tell us what wealth means to you and how does genuine wealth fit into your equation of wealth?
That's a great question. Can I share a story?
Sure.
I was in San Francisco doing a media, and there was a gentleman who invited me to come onto his show, and he had 50 million listeners. So it's a very big syndicated show. And I definitely wanted to do that one, because I wanted to reach more people. But I had to go onto his location to do it. I couldn't do a call-in. That was, he insisted on that. So I drive 2 hours there in this limousine to go to this radio show. And it's New Dimensions Radio, it was called. And when I got to the location, there was this building that looked bland. It was just this boxy building. And it didn't seem like it matched a radio station. Just this building that only had one door in the back. And I knocked on the door, nobody came. And I got in the limo and I thought, this is the address. And I finally got back up to the thing, and I knocked again, and somebody came to the door. This gentleman came. And he invited me in. And we walked through this labyrinth of shelving of radio reels to smaller to digital. We watched 48 years of doing a radio show's evolution of recordings as we went through these aisles. And as we got closer to where the radio set was, I found out that the man lived in the building with his wife. And for 48 years, he's been doing this radio show every single day and has this massive outreach. And he has interviewed everybody who's anybody on the planet. He's interviewed the greatest rock stars, from Jimi Hendrix to the Rolling Stones to the Beatles, politicians, celebrities. He's interviewed anybody who's anybody, even Larry King. So I felt really blessed to be able to get this opportunity. And at the very end of it, we did one live show and then one that was recorded for future. At the end, he handed me a sheet of paper that looked like it had been recorded from a copy machine for 48 years. Wow. And it was asking for donations to help keep the radio station alive. Okay. And it had $1, $5, $10, $20, and $50 denominations, which would have been significant 48 years ago. Yeah. But today it's minor. Yeah. And he asked, I do it, and I just chuckled when I gave that to me. And he says, did I offend you by asking for money? I said, you just let me speak to 50 million people twice for an hour each. That's worth thousands of dollars, and who knows how much that's worth. Absolutely, no, I would love to offer something. Yeah. And he said, oh, I thought I offended you by asking for so much. I said, no. I said, just out of curiosity, why is it that you're asking for so much? You're asking for money to run the show when you're a billionaire. You have $1 billion worth of assets sitting in this room here. And he looked at his wife and he goes, we don't have any money. We barely make it week to week. Okay. And I said, you have $1 billion worth of stored assets sitting on these shelves. If you were to package those and present those and put them into some sort of digital format and sell those now, you'd easily be a billionaire. I mean, there are people, they have Jimi Hendrix interviews. The people in the rock industry would pay anything to listen to that. You know, they have the Watergate issues there. I mean, every imaginable thing. And he just couldn't wrap his head around him that he was a billionaire with hidden assets when he was paying his bills month to week to week. And I explained to him that if you were to take your intellectual property and package it, you'd easily be a billionaire.
Yeah.
But you don't have a value on wealth building. You have a value on social influence with intellectual property.
Yeah.
So you have genuine wealth sitting in intellectual property and service to humanity socially that's never been converted into a capitalized form. And unless you have a value on physical financial wealth, this will sit there, and when you die, somebody who has a financial wealth focus will eventually convert this into a fortune.
Yeah.
And he just was stunned by this because he didn't realize that he was sitting on $1 billion worth of assets that were hidden, but he didn't have the value to ever convert that. I talked him into talking to people to get that converted. Mm-hmm. So he worked with people at Stanford University. They digitalized the entire thing.
Wow.
And they started selling it at very moderate fees to try to help salvage the station. He eventually passed away, but the station goes on because of that.
That's fantastic.
So that is one form of wealth that's not financial wealth, but it's a form of wealth. And that's the wealth of his experience, the wealth of his intellectual knowledge, wealth of his intellectual property, the wealth of social influence he's made. That's a form of wealth that's purely honorable, as equal as financial wealth, but he would never convert it into financial wealth because he didn't have a value on that. Mm. I also had a lady who worked for the Chamber of Commerce. And she had known everybody. She was an amazing social interactor. And she invited people and engaged them and went to their companies and invited them to these functions and knew the people who were who's who in the city of Houston, Texas, all the oil executives. She knew them all. But she was being paid $45,000 a year, about $4,000 a month, not quite. And it was gathering these people, and they were doing business deals in these things, and billions of dollars worth of business was going on in these meetings. And she was getting just enough to make sure she had an apartment, could pay for her little dog and her food and things of this nature. She had social wealth. Mm-hmm. And she came to the Breakthrough Experience program that I do to help people transform their life. And I asked her where her assets were, and that's where their assets were. Mm-hmm. And we created a company called the Liaison Group. And we helped her value herself to start negotiating with the people that she was bringing together. And if they did transactions, could she get a finder's fee or a percentage? She went from $45,000 to $750,000 in 1 year income.
That's amazing.
Because she now began to value the form of wealth she was sitting on, which was social wealth. Mm-hmm. The other gentleman didn't get to see his fortune turn into cash. Now, none of the forms of wealth are really better than any other ones, because whatever's valuable to us, and that varies with each individual, is where we store our wealth.
Yeah.
And if we want it to convert into financial wealth, we have to have a shift in values, or we will store it in those other forms. Had another lady, pardon me for sharing these stories,
sure.
But had another lady who walked into my training program in Houston, Texas, and stopped the program. She was the most stunning woman. People's mouths dropped, women and men. The women were going, checking everything out, what she's wearing, everything. The men were going, whoa, just stop the seminar. She was stunning. She was a 25 on a 10 scale as far as appearance. Yeah. And I went to lunch with her and my girlfriend at the time, because she was a friend of hers. And it was hard not to look at her. She was that stunning. But she told me something that blew my mind. She said, I learned from a little book when I was very young on how to marry the wealthiest man in the world. There's a book that came out of Hungary on how to marry the wealthiest men. And she said, and I read that book when I was young. My mother gave it to me. And I will not go out on a date unless they pay $500,000 for my evening. And this is not sexual. This is not an escort service. This is not a sexual thing. She says, this is the only way I can screen out and date people that are going to give me my goal. Mm-hmm. And it was shocking to her. It wasn't socially standard. Yeah. And there were women go, what? And then there were judgments and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. But what she said is that I value me and my appearance and my looks and I know it's valuable, so I'm not going to settle for anything less than somebody who can handle $500,000 for my evening. She had 8 people lined up to pay her $500,000 for dinner. She had accumulated a fortune out of it because she valued her assets that were physical assets. So I can go around, some people have, I have a friend who's a billionaire today because he capitalized on his spiritual wisdom and now has hospitals and has social functions and is involved in the United Nations and he's doing amazing things. But his was spiritual wisdom and he converted that into wealth, financial wealth. So there are spiritual wealth, there is intellectual wealth, there is business wealth. People have businesses that are worth a fortune and they don't have any cash flow until they sell it. There's others that have financial assets, there's others that have family assets. I know a woman that you could pay her $100 million and she said, you can't take my child away, $100 million. They're worth more than $100 million to me. Now on the weekends when they're teenagers, it might go down and fluctuate in price. But she had a value on family. I know others that have social interaction and others that are physically. So genuine wealth encompasses all 7 areas.
So it's relative.
It's relative to what you value. But everybody's wealthy. Everybody's wealthy. But they may not be financially wealthy. And the wealth is always stored in what they value most. And if they would like to convert it into financial wealth, it is always convertible. Alfred Marshall and his Principles of Economics show that every movement of a human being can be measured economically, and you can either induce it or reduce it economically. So we can convert all of our wealth into cash wealth if we want, or we can store it in the wealth we have. But everybody has a form of wealth, but they sometimes expect it to be in another form. And if they expect it to be outside what they value, they're going to depreciate themselves and not honor the magnificent wealth that they already have. But they have to convert it to, if they want to convert it into capital, financial capital, they have to have a value on financial capital to be able to convert it, to package it.
Sure. So what do you make of Robert Kennedy's statement in that speech when he said GNP measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile? Because a lot of thought leaders on this point of genuine wealth see it as more about a quality of life. And they claim that that should be measured and there should be some emphasis put on measuring quality of life as opposed to just measuring the growth of an economy using indicators.
Well, if we limit it to financial wealth, we're not encompassing 6 out of 7 areas. So financial wealth is more universal because we can convert with finances many of the other areas. But still, there are some people that have no interest in the financial form. They're interested in dedicating their lives to their beautiful children, and that's their wealth. And they're contributing to the planet as much as the person over here in the financial industry. There's some that are totally social caused. I met people in Austria when I spoke at the Walsell conference. There were 200 leaders in the world, and there were 6 issues that we were trying to address in the world, and I got to be one of the speakers. And I met a young man who was 27 who had developed ways of harvesting water out of the earth in simple forms for areas that are drought, where people have no water. And he had dedicated his life to that. Now, he had billionaires sitting there looking at that and how they could capitalize that into cash. But he had no, that wasn't his focus. He had one focus, and that is, how do I bring water to people in the world? He had a fortune sitting in his wealth, his intellectual wealth and his social cause wealth. So you don't want to limit it to the GDP or the gross national product.
Because that creates a mindset, I think.
Because that's purely only one area.
Mindset,
and not everybody has that as a value. And all the other values also have value. They all have equal value. The world needs all the values.
So in other words, a nation could be wealthier than it sees itself as measured by something like GDP.
Some underdeveloped countries have not the financial wealth, but they have family wealth. They have a culture of family, and they're close, and they'll have their gatherings sitting at their dinner table, and they'll have their spiritual wealth, and they'll feel communioned as groups spiritually towards causes and helping other people. This is just as much a form of wealth as this other. Now, if a person has, there's a way of empowering all of them. I teach that in my programs to help people show that you can empower all of them and empower all 7 forms of wealth. You can actually empower your intellectual property by learning. You can empower business by building a business that serves great numbers of people, which could also bring financial wealth.
Yeah.
You could also do something socially with that wealth. I know a gentleman that gave $1 billion that he had accumulated and gave it away to the Tibetan Foundation for the Dalai Lama to help people with his causes.
Sure.
He converted it because he realized, okay, I'm getting up in an age. This isn't going to serve me. I want to do something with the world. So every one of the forms of wealth have equal value to the people that have those values. But we typically think of wealth, we immediately jump to the conclusion that's financial wealth. So I think the Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, when he was talking about that, he was saying a very important principle that we want to honor all forms of wealth, and genuine wealth is the one that brings fulfillment to the people based on their values. And so if you have a high value on family and you're not even running business or trying to accumulate money or stuff like that, that's a form of wealth.
Yeah.
And for all you know, Rose Kennedy, who is the mother of this gentleman, her mission statement, I have the actual book that has her mission statement handwritten in it, that was given to me as a gift. And it says, I dedicate my life to raising a family of world leaders.
Yeah.
So her wealth was the form of raising beautiful children that became leaders.